Welcome to Keep Taking Ground, the Saxophone podcast. I'm your host, Jesse Ryan, and we're back with season number 2. Again, I want to say a huge thank you to everyone that followed the pages, reached out to me, and just shared kind words about how you enjoyed season 1. The support was really overwhelming. And I want to encourage you to keep doing that, keep sharing the episodes, and don't forget to subscribe. I'm excited to bring you 10 new conversations this season. And if you're new to the podcast, welcome. And you can expect conversations with award-winning and in-demand saxophonists from around the world and across jazz and contemporary styles. Well, I believe that award-winning and in-demand saxophonists know something that the rest of us don't yet know, and that's what I'm curious about. So I really want to create a resource that would help you keep taking ground in your personal, professional, musical, and creative journeys, and just connect the saxophone community worldwide. Without further ado, today's guest is saxophonist, composer, producer, educator, and a curator. He's been a formidable force on the international music scene as a leader of his own ensembles, as well as a guest with many acclaimed groups for the past 37 years. He's highly regarded for his insightful and innovative approach to composition and performance. He's an inspired voice among the ranks of improvising musicians. He's earned numerous awards and critical acclaim for his records, recorded works, and passionate live appearances, and has been recognized by the New York Times as one of the most provocative musical thinkers of his generation. It's my pleasure to welcome the one and only Greg Osby to the podcast. Greg, how are you doing?
I'm great, Ryan. Thanks for inviting me.
My pleasure, man. No, on season 1 of the podcast, I had Louis Dennis, who has been one of my mentors here in Toronto. And when I was planning for season 2 of the podcast, he was like, you should totally get Greg to do it. I was like, I would love to have Greg, but I thought I may not be able to connect with you. So it's really a pleasure to have you on. And so let's start at the beginning, Greg. So how did it all begin for you? How did you get a saxophone in your hand?
I would say by default, really. There was no plan. There just happened to be a vacancy in the junior high school, wind ensemble. And the teacher stuck his head in the door and said, hey, does anybody want to learn how to play an instrument? And a friend, my best friend and I, we ran to the band room. And there happened to be 2 cases. There was a smaller case and there was a large case. And of course, people go for the bigger case, and he reached the bigger case, which happened to be a trombone. But not for his agility, I would be a trombonist right now. So the smaller case was a clarinet. So that happened to be my first instrument. I played that for almost a year. Then I got my hands on a flute. And then maybe a year and a half after, the initial music study, I got my hands on an alto saxophone. And that's when things really started to make sense, because I recognized it as something that was applicable to, popular music, and people, recognize it as, a real instrument. Flute and clarinet being more symphonic or concert-based instruments, I didn't see the viability even at that age.
Right.
And so, and so I took to it very rapidly, actually. I mean, I didn't really have that much counseling or any personal instruction, because the guy who was the band director was a trumpet player, and he taught me the fingerings on clarinet. And he taught me the woodwind fingerings. So I'd never had a real teacher. And, I just, was very observant and a quick study. And so by, a year and a half from being introduced, to my first instrument, I was already playing in blues bands, little R&B bands, and funk and soul bands and stuff. This is quite a while ago. This is 1972. So there was no MIDI, there was no sampling or whatever. You had to have a horn section.
Right.
So here I was, 13, 14-year-old kid in these groups with grown men who were like in their 30s and 40s. So it was a great, trial by fire situation.
And where did you grow up?
I grew up in St. Louis, Missouri, which is a very musical place.
Yeah, absolutely.
Has its own very strong regional sound and characteristics. You can almost in the United States, you can almost tell where somebody's from based upon the way they articulate, the way they approach music, the environment that they placed themselves in. So St. Louis was a great catapult for me.
Yeah, yeah. So in that way, how do you feel like if like growing up in St. Louis sort of shaped your musical identity or even like the direction that you took?
Well, at that time, again, all of the bars and taverns and pubs, they all had live music. And there was a pub on each street corner, more or less. And many of these had organs. They had Hammond B3 organs. So it was a lot of, funky toe tapping, finger popping, soul jazz happening. Yeah. And, and a lot of that music was also on jukeboxes, boogaloo type music, like Song for My Father, Watermelon Man, Lou Donaldson, Lonnie, Dr. Lonnie Smith, that kind of stuff, Jimmy Smith. So it was kind of the wallpaper, to my childhood, more or less. This kind of funky soul jazz, groove oriented R&B atmosphere.
Yeah, that's amazing. Wow. Yeah. And I know that blues has a really big place in St. Louis city. So what was your relationship with just like blues musicians and blues bands? And
well, of course, at that time, I wasn't very responsive, to the principles of blues because it sounded like old people's music, as well as jazz. I was more interested in popular affectations. R&B, soul, things like that. Now, I will, give you a quick anecdote that firmly details, how my mind's ear was shaped. At that time, around from 1969 to the mid 1970s, my mother worked at a record distribution company in St. Louis. So all of the major labels would send her company the new releases, the promotional copies and things like that, and then they in turn would distribute them to all the stores in town. So literally every day she would come home with armloads of vinyl of, overstock or returns or, things that were undersold, promotional items. So we had literally mountains of music. And, so of course I couldn't make a playlist on an iPhone because, that wasn't, a possibility. So we would stack the records on the record player and make our own playlist that way. And so I developed a very unbiased ear in terms of accepting various forms of music because we would listen to whatever she brought, without any, criticism or any judgment. Everything from rock to classical to gospel to heavy, blues, soul, everything. And so that opened my mind's ear up and, the possibility of, participating in a world of good music.
Yeah, that's amazing. I often, like when I hear people share that, I reflect on my own journey with being open to different sounds from different places and different approaches. I went through a very a period of time when I was very hyper focused on music had to sound like this, and if it wasn't this, it wasn't good. So I'm at a place now where I'm realizing that approach comes out of a place where you try to isolate music as a thing unto itself. But when you realize that music is an expression as a cultural expression, you realize that if you want to embrace people, you have to also embrace those the diversity of that expression through music as well. So how have those experiences and you're coming up through music, you've had an amazing career and still continue to have an amazing career as a leader, as a sideman, as an educator. How have all of those experiences shaped the type of musician you are today? And so in other words, what have you been in pursuit of,
Well, the fact is, once you enter into the professional realm, you recognize that the limitations that you impose upon yourself by being into one type of music, how that limits your ability to work, to be regarded as somebody who is open and willing to do different things. And it vastly limits your ability to earn a living.
Yeah.
So it's actually self-destructive to be one-track minded, in especially in the contemporary arena of music. It's so broad and vast.
Yeah.
Categories are almost, not important anymore.
Great.
But I when I migrated to New York, out of university and conservatory studies, I wanted to be someone who both left their mark, in whatever environment I found myself in, and somebody who was sought after as a specialist, who did something that nobody else did.
Right.
Somebody who played a saxophone but didn't sound like anybody else, or who didn't negotiate through music like anybody else, for better or for worse. I mean, I would rather be regarded as somebody that somebody really, really likes or somebody really doesn't like, as opposed to somebody say, it's okay.
Yeah.
I mean, you want to leave, an impacting, resounding influence on whatever you do.
Yeah.
And so, I endeavored to develop that very early on. Some say prematurely, but as I was developing as a musician, I was always figuring out how to craft, a sound and a vibe, because all the people that I champion, that I cherish as my heroes, they have that.
Absolutely.
They have a personality, a definite, stamp, and that they leave, on everything they do. And I would offer that none of it is accidental. I would think that everything that they did was deliberate.
That's so interesting. I remember having a conversation with another saxophone player friend of mine. We were talking about from the perspective of like the institutionalization of music education, how music institutes churn out musicians or graduates every year. All right, hundreds of thousands. But let's focus on the saxophone. I see a lot of really amazing saxophone players around. I live in Toronto here, just a lot, all over the place, all over the world. Jazz is a global phenomenon now. But the element of artistry or being an artist, it's very different than being a musician, than being a good saxophone player. Do you think that goal of carving out becoming a stylist, developing your own personal sound and all of that, for me, that's very, very, very much connected to becoming an artist. Do you think that's attainable for everyone?
No, I don't think so.
Right.
Absolutely not. I mean, some people are journeymen, they're everyman. They can make every gig. They're good readers. They interpret music well. They play well in the section. They blend well with others, and they can play a variety of styles. Yeah. They can play in orchestras, pit bands, horn sections, studio. They can do it. They can do it all. However, you won't be able to pick them out of a police lineup, because they don't have, a strong enough character in their playing that they stand out and, leave you with something as a takeaway. But that's fine, because these people largely work more than the so-called artists.
Exactly.
Most artists and stylists and innovators and stuff die broke, and they're scrambling to make their rent every month. Wow. And yet, they are unique and, icons.
And major influencers. Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I think, we have to, straddle the fence these days, and recognize how far we're willing to go, how much we're willing to sacrifice, and to recognize what's necessary in order for us to, have stability in our existence, and still make our mark.
Yeah, so be able to create. Yeah, that's always the fine balance.
The problem is that institutions, schools and universities and those programs, conservatories, they don't bring that subject up.
Right,
they give you the particulars of, composition and the mechanics of playing and having a good sound and things like this. Yeah. But they're not really talking about the actualities of music as a lifestyle. Maintaining a budget, sustenance, cooking, How are you going to live? How are you going to present yourself?
Yeah.
Doing interviews. How do you
Yeah.
promote yourself? To make yourself available for somebody to hire or to call you. These things. They just give you your degree and kick you out to make room for the next group of incoming students.
Right,
and now you're out here on your own. Like, how do I fend for myself? And that is why most recent graduates or people who have been long-term graduates, they're doing something outside of music, to sustain themselves. So I think this, the business of music as a lifestyle needs to be a course, in these schools that needs to be developed.
Yeah, I mean that makes me think, and I'm trying to go easy on the institutions here because there are a ton of really good ones out there at the same time, But I'm a real fan of mentorship type programs.
Yes.
Where students get paired up with mentors, which is kind of like what happened long ago, or even colleges like Berkeley when they started. It was that sort of like where professionals would come to be developed and paired up and so on. We've kind of moved away from that. And I want to say that I think we're going to see more of that popping up in the next, maybe let's say 10 to 15 years. I think so, because I think the colleges are, the enrollment is going down and so on. But
yes.
But that makes me think about the thing that's missing is that human connection, and music is a living, breathing thing that's kept alive by the people that practice and compose and innovate. And you've no doubt been one of those innovators. So can we talk about, or maybe some of the things that you've been interested in developing to develop your own personal sound and an approach? I mean, you've done that in jazz, you've done that with making those connections between jazz and hip hop and collaborating with different artists. So let's talk about that.
Well, I like to call myself an environmentalist. I've always wanted to establish and to maintain an environment for myself that showcase my best attributes. And all the people, again, the people that I admire, they did that. Their composition sounded exactly like the way they played. So whether they were playing their own music or not, whoever was playing it, who wrote it, based upon these characteristics that are customized and built into the music. A monk composition sounds like a monk composition. A John Coltrane, a Charles Mingus, a Bud Powell, Duke Ellington, these kind of, so I always wanted to create a frame. And then I'll be the work of art that goes inside that frame. So even if that work of art is in another frame, meaning somebody else's music or somebody else's band or somebody else's environment, the work of art maintains its integrity.
I love that concept.
So in order to do that, you have to introspectively look into the musical mirror, more or less, and see, okay, what are my defining characteristics? What are my strengths? And so you have to take those strengths and you have to polish them to a blinding hue. It's like, this is my thing. Maybe I play trills a lot, or maybe I play these series of intervals a lot, or maybe it's my tone or my sound or my rhythm, or, so whatever it is, you have to identify it and you have to maximize upon that. You have to say, okay, this is my thing. This is my calling card. This is what people are going to recognize before. And then you write compositions that showcase that. And you deliberately develop that. And so the weaknesses, some of our weaknesses, I mean, they may be almost like tics, and you can't get rid of them if you want to. I mean, if you try, there's nothing you can do about it. You can go through all this intense study and whatever, and you listen to a recording and you're still doing that thing. That's the thing that you need to be focusing on.
Right.
And so I look at that, and every once in a while, I'll do some self-evaluations because I record myself regularly when I practice. And I'll hear myself doing some things and say, wow, I keep doing that, so I'll write a composition based upon that thing. And that's been, to a large degree, a lot of my creative output. It probably was a mistake, or probably was something that was, indeliberate, or it probably was something that I tried to do and I missed the mark. So I said, well, instead of me doing this, I'll just do this because I keep doing it anyway. So that's the strength.
That's really interesting, Greg.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I'm just reflecting on my own development as a saxophone player. And I think, and I want to just clarify that I don't think what you're saying is to not it's not to fix weaknesses. And that's
Right.
not what you're
No,
saying at all,
no,
right?
no, no.
But it's this idea of reframing reframing the weaknesses in themselves. I find that there's a lot of judgment around developing or sounding a particular way, especially now in jazz. And I think that's a product of a couple of things, maybe social media, the fact that there's sort of standardized education, so and all of that. But I feel like if some of the essence of jazz and the music coming from the human experience is that idea of individualism and also humanity in the music. And I think that mechanism you just talked about of reframing those weaknesses kind of takes in consideration the humanity of a musician.
Absolutely. Well, let's be honest. Schools, they have to codify the information and make it teachable.
Yeah,
absolutely. So that it can be graded, and there are certain levels and things can be judged based upon the rigors of what's necessary to graduate and things like that. So they have to teach the same material to a variety of people, regardless of their aptitude, their ability, their background, and whatever. Some people are going to succeed and persevere. Some people are going to falter because some of this material they may be able to absorb and to execute with ease, and some people may find it daunting, and very difficult. And that's just the way it is, in schools. But you touched upon the idea of mentorship.
Yeah.
So I think in order to augment these regimented studies in schools, there also needs to be a pairing and of students that are in need or in search of, with established elders who can give them one-on-one criticism, treatment, nurturing, because this is what I did. I mean, once I got out of the institutions, I actively sought out people who I admired, and, without any embarrassment or whatever, even if they openly rejected me, I just went to the next person. I mean, when I got to New York, I openly sought out. And some of them I wasn't able to have a direct audience with, but I went to see them regularly. I would go see George Coleman every other night. I would go see Gary Bartz. I would go see Eddie Lockjaw Davis if he was in town. I became, friends with Joe Henderson and Eddie Harris and people like that. And, to the degree that they would call me on the phone and I could interview them, more or less, and I could extract the things from them that I didn't get in the schools. So I think there's a certain level of fearlessness that's required, in our pursuit of, the golden goose or the pot of gold of information. That exists. I mean, it's out there. Yeah.
Wow. I started to think about the sort of things that you've been you've either popularized or become popular for, in terms of your approach. So can we talk about your harmonic or like melodic approach on the saxophone and how you went about sort of developing that?
Okay, so when I was a student, I used to make regular trips to New York. It was, a very cheap flight or, a very inexpensive bus ride. And I would go down maybe once a month or once every couple of months. And I would go to the jam sessions. At first, and there was an abundance of them at that time. This was around 1981, And so I would go just observe at first. I wouldn't participate. I wanted to see who was hot, and who was really dealing, and who, based upon the reputation, if I could see that, that they had some shortcomings, and I would say, okay, well, yeah. I'm not so bad, this is the man, so, youthful ego or whatever.
Yeah.
So then, I got the I started to take my horn and started to go to these sessions, often enough to the degree that the people thought I lived in town. They thought I moved to New York. That was part of my strategy, to be seen and heard so often that the transition would be smooth and people, didn't think I was a recent, migrant. Okay, so upon my observation, I recognized that there was this really heavy Charlie Parker, Sonny Stitt, Cannonball Adderley, post-bop, a term that I despise, but that kind of language.
Yes.
It was that, and then it was the post-law scene kind of expression, the fire players, the more, I don't even like the word avant-garde, but the more, energy players.
Yeah.
They weren't really coming from bebop. They were coming from another facet, in the spectrum, and I respect them too. Mm-hmm. So I say, man, I want to play with those guys too. And I want to, swing, and I want to play, changes. I want to do all the so-called legitimate things, but I also want to play with the so-called downtown guys, the semi-classical third string players. I want to play with, some of the chamber music guys, saxophone quartets. It was all, I wanted to have my foot wet in every arena, comfortably, and, with a level of familiarity, so they wouldn't say, oh, this guy is like encroaching on our territory. I wanted to say, yeah, he sounds natural over here too. Yeah. So I went to all the different clubs and all the different, performance spaces and checked out everybody and kept a tally of who, were the main fixtures in those scenes. I said, man, I was a Cannonball Adderley fanatic. I don't know if anybody can hear that now. Maybe if I play a ballad or something, it seeps through. But I was living, breathing, eating Cannonball Adderley sandwiches for breakfast. That was my guy, And I recognized that wasn't going to take me very far. It wasn't if I wanted to be a well-rounded working musician, So while I was still in Boston, I stopped, listening to alto players completely, for about maybe 6 months. And I studied tenor saxophone players, exclusively for a while to try to get a broader sound, to get a different level of navigation on the instrument, with the deep, resonant lower register. Because a lot of alto players, they exist solely in the upper register with this kind of abrasive sound and don't really have that butter sound, the sound that makes people, just swoon when you play, slower tempos, that is kind of, falling by the wayside because a lot of people are focusing on altissimo and all kind of other things. But okay, I digress. So I did that for a number of months to my satisfaction. And then the real turning point was when I started to transcribe and study exclusively pianists, guitarists, and vibraphonists. I transcribed hundreds of different solos from various players, primarily because they phrase differently and they don't have to breathe. Right. So their lines tend to be longer. Yeah. Yes. And also I was very curious to see if I could somehow adapt a pianistic approach on the saxophone, given that they're polyphonic and they play with two hands. Yeah. How can I compress that information, with, an update, to the intervallic system and the rhythms comping, to simulate comping for myself on the saxophone and also to simulate a two-handed approach. So that took a lot of, theorizing and, conceptualizing. But I arrived at, what I thought felt like that approach, a pianistic, vibraphonic, guitaristic approach on a monophonic instrument. And so that's what happened. I would write out my own patterns. I would write them out in 12 keys. I would make modifications of those patterns. I would erase notes and change the intervals and do octave re-registration and displacement. And I came up with my own personal workbook of concentrated study that pulled me away from the traditional recognizable trajectory of alto saxophone playing. And I was only, 21, 22 years old when I was thinking I may have been way ahead of myself, but I really wanted to make some kind of impression on anybody who heard me. So I thought about these things. I'm kind of a planner.
Yeah.
I'm very organized. So I said, okay, I'm going to go to New York. I'm going to do this. I'm going to go here. I'm going to meet these people. I'm going to talk to this person. I'm going to blah, blah, blah. And it was very, very structured.
Yeah. So a big part of the jazz tradition is having this sort of standard repertoire that we all work through to develop language and all of that. So with you having that, having your own unique, basically your own language, personal language, and a system that you develop for vocabulary, really, how did you then proceed to take that and work it through? Did you have like standard music you were applying it to, or were you just trying to develop that sound and then just organically trying to apply it to whatever you were playing? Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Simultaneously, while I'm doing this, of course, I'm playing all the standards as everyone else does. I mean, when I was in school, we would have these marathon jam sessions, out of, the real book, which was new at that time. The real book was new. There was a guy who sat out in front of the school. He had a green Army duffel bag. And he had a dog. The dog had Ray-Ban sunglasses and a red bandana.
Yeah.
He would sit out there with the dog, and he said, "Hey, you want to buy a fake book? Because it was illegal."
Oh.
He was a real book pusher. He was peddling these real books, and so now here's the dividing line. Those of us who thought that we were, like on the bebop track, like really serious blues swinging, we were dismissive of anybody who had one of those. Said, and I'm talking about me, Jean Toussaint, Branford Marsalis, Donald Harrison, people like that. We were, we did sessions, we played sessions, and like you have to memorize the songs. You have to memorize all the chants and everything. Anybody, standing up with a music stand, reading out those real books, which is why I can't really understand why people have those fake books on their phones now, and they go to gigs like that. I've seen people with a music stand with their phone, like reading that. I don't understand it. Like, you knew the gig was coming. Why didn't you just learn all the music? These songs are 100 years old now. It's like, come on. But anyway, so that was it. I mean, we played the sessions, and we took the tunes through like different keys. We would modulate. Even a half step, would throw people off. I mean, you play all the things you are. Instead of A flat, you go up a half step to A. Within 95% of the people don't want to take a solo. But see, that's what we did regularly. Just to train ourselves and to have no fear with key signatures. We would take songs, in 4/4 and make them 3/4 or 5/4 or 7. Just to become familiar with different meters. We would take ballads and play them fast, and we would take fast tunes and play them, painfully slow.
Yeah.
Just so you don't become married to any, one way, because, I don't need to hear, Soft Is in the Morning Sunrise or, any of those songs in the same key at the same tempo ever again. I mean, but if I go to someone's gig and they, do an arrangement on them, or they modify or stylize them in a very personalized way, that's interesting. That's compelling to me. Yeah. So this is how we thought, this is what we were doing. And in the meantime, simultaneously, I was trying to figure out, how am I going to, personalize what I'm doing so that people will call me for me. Yeah.
And what advice do you have for maybe the aspiring professional saxophonist, or maybe even a professional saxophonist that's just beginning that journey of developing a personal sound, personal melodic approach, or just personal language?
In short, I would say possibly if you reach, some creative impasse or any kind of, roadblock in your playing, you're stuck, you don't know what to practice, you don't think that you're progressing, or if you're writing a song and you're just stuck, can't go any further, or if you have any issue, with regards to your development, jot those questions down.
Mm.
And then ask those same questions from 10 to 20 people. I guarantee that you have from 10 to 20 different answers.
Yeah.
One or more of those answers is going to be the answer to your question.
Yeah, that's pretty much that we just said is the catalyst for this podcast.
Yeah.
Because I really believe that if you want success in anything, just get a bunch of people that are already doing it and just get their perspective on it, and you'll begin to see those connections. All of it may not help you, but something will, and something will stick for sure.
Well, I mean, I'm always open, to exchange ideas, even those that I don't agree with. I want to know what makes people tick, how they think. I want to, them to avail me with their perspectives on things, because I mean, chances are they're going to hit me to something that I wasn't aware of. Yeah. And so I've done that, for, the greater part of my professional life. Even still, I'll do that. I have marathon, telephone conversations, with various saxophone players. Even my students would throw me a question that I may not even know the answer to fully, but I say, let's talk tomorrow and I'll have an answer. And, during my early days of New York, I would, get together with my colleagues and we would sit around and have listening sessions and we would play records and tapes, live tapes and, rare recordings. And we would talk about it. And we would, critique things and we would analyze it. And then we would sit around and try to transcribe and extract things from it. I would regularly go around to the clubs and see the elders, buy them a beer or a glass of wine and sit up sometimes until, the sun came up. They would sit up and indulge me, young me, and all my questions because they saw me as a serious young man who was earnestly trying to learn. So I mean, there's only one thing that can happen, in your pursuit of the information. People can outright refuse you or, not, accommodate you. So the best thing to do is to go to the next person and find. And I want to emphasize that it's really important not to stick to the precedent, that's been established on your instrument in your studies. Saxophone players don't need to just study saxophone players, study and transcribe saxophone players, because there's a wealth of information on people who play other instruments. For a while, I studied trumpet players, and transcribed, Booker Little solos, Freddie Hubbard solos, and Clifford Brown solos, because those three valves, offer a great deal of information for a saxophone player, and trying to play, negotiate, that information and to interpret it is invaluable. So the whole thing is to be voracious in your appetite, in your pursuit, of information.
I'd love to chat about, some of your favorite experiences or musical moments on and off stage or collaborating with folks. But before we do that, I'd like to get your perspective and a deeper question, which is the importance of music within our culture. I think in a postmodern society where everything shouldn't say everything, but a lot of what we do is very fancy and sometimes not connected to, I think what I'm trying to get at is that, I grew up in Trinidad and Tobago, and there's such a communal sense within music and everything that we do. In places like North America and larger places, you find community in pockets as opposed to across big geographical spaces. So with all of that and with technology and all of that, I think that sometimes we can lose the sense of the importance of music or the why is music needed within our society? Why are artists needed within our society? The reason I'm asking this to Greg is because I think there's a lot of musicians during this time with the pandemic, and it's really hit the music industry hard. And there are a lot of young musicians that might be struggling and second guessing if they should do this. So, somebody like yourself who have been doing it for a while and been through many seasons of shifts in the music industry. So for you, what's the importance of music and the importance of artists creating?
Well, for some people, music is craft. For some people, music is life and culture. I mean, it's the very fabric of their existence. Yeah. And for some people, music is product. And these are the people that appropriate the music and cheapen it, more or less, because they use it for product placement, they use it for promotion and advertising and things like that. Then there are others who look at it as a very, very personalized way of the expression and a suggestion of possibility. And then there are some people that live the music because culturally, the music it symbolizes backgrounds, historical reference, dialect, geography, things like this. Say for instance, in the Caribbean, which is, the people from the Caribbean, their attachment to the music is closer tied, to Africa.
Yeah.
And so, and the drum and different cadences in the music and symbolic references inside that are customized and built into the music. So when you hear these things and when they play these things, they have a deeper meaning than somebody who's just playing to get paid or playing to make the rent. I mean, I talk to people, during my trips to Africa, or my students and friends, in and from the Caribbean. They say when they hear like a certain pattern, they say, "Oh, when I was growing up, that meant there was a celebration. Somebody had a new baby, or even further back, that meant that the enemy was approaching. Let's get yourself together. Sharpen your spears or whatever. Or the white man is offshore. Watch out, because my cousin, was led away in chains. So brace yourselves. Or we had a successful hunt, so we're going to have a feast this evening. We're going to have a party, a fiesta. So music had a deeper cultural significance. As we've moved away from that, and people, they associate music with things that are connected to matters of the heart, the soul, and to the deeper culture and stuff. Things get lost. Things get shrouded, and the music gets appropriated, by people who don't have its best interests in mind. So those of us that are aware of that, those of us that understand that those ties and those connections must be maintained for the music to keep its integrity and the thread to our greater culture. We have to take it upon ourselves to be the personal institution that incorporate that into the music. Our music always contains those characteristics, and we have to verbalize it. We have to be griots and tell those stories. A lot of this stuff isn't documented, and a lot of, even if it is documented, it's not taught readily, unless you bring it to someone's attention. Which is a big thing that's going on here in the United States. A lot of history has been shrouded and put on a back burner or completely obscured. So we have to take it upon ourselves to be the stewards, of the the promotion of that information, to young people, to interested parties. And I'm not saying to only Black people, but just culturally, people just need to be aware of the origins,
absolutely,
and the significance of all these particulars.
No, you talked just Sunday about remembering the past and telling the stories, and in some ways somebody might hear you say that and say, well, that's such a traditionalist approach, and I don't think that anybody who knows your music would describe you as a traditionalist, but yet you still value that thing of preserving the history and what the music is at its core. How have you found that balance in your own like creative pursuits as an artist and as a saxophone player?
Well, for one, I don't accept being called a traditionalist as a bad thing. Somehow that's a bad word for some people.
Yeah.
Or you're conservative, or you're a traditionalist, or you're a historian, and all that kind of stuff. Okay, and secondly, again, I make reference to the people that I admire.
Yeah.
All of them, climbed the stairs, to the to reach that level that made them who they are now, which is why we're still talking about them, decades after their passing.
Yeah.
They started at a certain place. They picked up certain values. They embraced those. They exhibited those values in their music, and that's just the way it is. That's just
it's like a continuum.
Yeah, I don't think anybody, just landed on a planet in some, UFO and just had like a style that nobody ever heard of, and it's not based upon anything, and it's not, it doesn't reference any so-called traditional values. I mean, at its root, I want everything that I do to be tied, to the efforts and the output of my, my forefathers, and sisters. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
It's very important.
Yeah. I love that.
So I mean, as you can, probably tell, I really enjoy, having, these types of exchanges. I love teaching, for one.
Yeah.
And two, I love, to talk about music and to, get, various perspectives on it, from other people, and maybe through it all, I can impart, some level of wisdom, or or to avail somebody, from my experiences and things like that. I think it's really important, and that's why I'm not dismissive of anybody, regardless of level or their style or whatever, because there's something to be extracted from everything and everybody.
Right.
I've learned a lot from people who could barely play. They've asked me questions out of their innocence. They've asked me a question that esteemed professors haven't asked. They just didn't know that it was like a far out question, and it makes me nobody's ever asked me that before. So I said, I'll get back to you in a couple of days. And things like that are provocative. I mean, I've been like prodded, in areas and pushed into areas that I never would have gone to, on my own, from children, or from people who, weren't that experienced in music. So I don't think we, should, be quick to dismiss. It's very, very important.
Yeah. Let's chat about some of your favorite experiences, musical experiences on stage, maybe with your projects, or like just working with other folks.
Yeah. Well, some of my favorite experiences have been as a sideman, during the days of my early career, because I established a reputation right on, and people say, "Wow, there's a cat in town, and he can play a variety of styles. He has a good sound. He knows a lot of tunes and good attitude. He dresses well. He shows up on time. He's reliable. These things are very important if you want to work."
Yeah.
And so, I got calls from everybody, from McCoy Tyner to Freddie Hubbard, Woody Shaw, Joanne Brackeen, of course, Jim Hall. Many years. Andrew Hill, Muhal Richard Abrams. One highlight that really contoured, my thinking as a leader was, my 6, maybe almost 7 years with Jack DeJohnette, from 1985 to, it was like 91, 92, something around there. Because, just his liberal attitude, and the way he picked his sidemen. He didn't pick sidemen just so he could tell them what to do. He picked people who exhibited characteristics that he thought would augment the music. Now, no matter what anybody else thought of these people, he would put these people together almost like misfits, people who existed on the fringes, on the periphery of the scene or whatever. He would put them with other people who may or may not have been well liked, just to see what that would happen. He directly got that from Miles Davis. Miles Davis would hire Coltrane and Red Garland, who people thought was a cocktail pianist, or Philly Joe Jones, who people thought was unreliable and they didn't really like the way he played, or all these kind of people. And he would put them together and have these masterful groups. And Jack did that. So I said, once I start, put myself out there as a leader, I'm going to find people who have that thing, that it factor, whether or not they're popular or not. And, there have been some misfires, but largely, it was a great mixture. I like to call them recipes, me finding ingredients, just for the right recipe, because sometimes you have some brilliant people, they're renowned, they're famous, they're winning the polls and everything, but they just don't blend well with other people. Either, their ego makes them want to be the highlight of the ensemble. They play too loud, or if they play too many chords, or drummer, it's just too busy. They just don't fit well. So that's why I've liberally delved into the youth pool. I've gotten a lot of people out of colleges and universities. One, they're eager to be there. Two, they practically memorize all the music. And, three, they try, a lot harder, and they go the extra distance to give you what you need. So, that, I would say, getting together, with a host of my peers and establishing a musicians artist collective, in the mid to late 1980s. Steve Coleman and Cassandra, Jerry Allen, Terry Van Marvin Smitty Smith, Robin Eubanks. We organized a collective called the M-Base Collective in Brooklyn. And we did this because, all of us, were side persons, with other groups. I mean, Jerry was playing with Ornette Coleman, and Steve was playing with Dave Holland. I was playing with Jack DeJohnette. Terry Lane was playing with everybody, So we wanted to get together on a regular basis, to write music and to include, characteristics, that were important to us in our makeup, because we thought that, there was a push backwards, everybody was calling us young lions and things like that. Wanted us to play all straight ahead music. Record companies were hitting on everybody, to play, these swinging, groups. And that's cool, because we love that music too. But what about the music that had other elements? What about, West African based music? What about music from the Caribbean? What about Latin jazz? What about soul and funk and swing and hip hop and all? We wanted, a recipe that was the embodiment of all these things that we liked and wasn't, dismissive of any of it. So that's what that was about. So that was a high point in my development, because I was able to feed directly off of the triumphs of some people that I really liked.
You've done some collaborations with hip hop artists as well. Can you talk about that? I think there's probably a large group of the audience that might be coming at music, having grown up in the 80s, 90s. That might be that may not necessarily see those overt connections or know that somebody like yourself have lent their voices to that style. And so,
well, in the mid to late 90s, 80s, all the way up into the early 90s, I used to contract musicians for a large number of New York-based hip hop artists. Okay. So, because what happened was, sampling became a very lucrative enterprise for the people who did those records initially. So they started to charge, these hip hop producers crazy money for, a 6-second sample, or, it was basically, their management and the attorneys. Now, I mean, they would charge people, like 5 figures for something that was like, very, and then record companies started to employ people, they had rooms of people with headphones on doing sample identification. And so they would go after these hip hop producers, for sampling something, without getting it cleared.
Right.
So it was crazy. So they would, a lot of these people knew, I lived in Brooklyn at the time, so they would call me and I would take musicians into the studio and we would do sample replication. We would like play these samples and we would change the bass line a little bit. We might change the chord. We might change the horn section a little bit. Then we would dust up the sample, with scratches and popcorn and make it sound like an old record. So then it was a new recording, and then they didn't have to pay anybody but us. And it was very lucrative because hip hop was a big thing. So, and it was a cash business. And so that was great. So that got my foot in the door, with a lot of these hip hop artists. And so I signed with the Blue Note Records in 1989, and did a recording that came out in 91. So in 93, I just wondered to myself, what would it sound like, if contemporary improvised music, also known as, I don't like that word. If that and hip hop got together and had a baby.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? What would that baby sound like? I mean, if we can meet in the middle and shake hands and have equal parts in terms of sonic balance, I wanted my live band, to interact, with some hip hop artists.
Is that what you were trying to explore on 3D Lifestyle?
That's exactly what I was trying to do. So, so I did some gigs first. I had, piano, bass, and drums, and myself on saxophone, and I got a DJ, and then I got some MCs, and then I said, wow, this is working really well. And I wanted the MCs to rap melodically, not just in a monotone pitch. And I also wanted the content of what they're talking about to embrace, what was important to me, and not necessarily murder and mayhem, and drug dealing. And I wanted them, to reference, some of the great elders, in the music. And so that's, that gave birth, to that project. And so I had done some things, with, producers and stuff. So I sought out, Tribe Called Quest, Ali Shaheed Muhammad, and, people like that. And I got, I love Public Enemy. They were my favorite group. So Bomb Squad and Eric Sadler and Street Element. And then, the follow-up recording, which was called Black Book, I got CL Smooth, because I love Pete Rock and CL Smooth. I also used their engineers. I went to their studios to record some of the stuff. And I also got the mastering engineers to master it, to give it, like the bigness,
That makes sense. I mean, like when I listen to that album, there's so many layers in the music. It's like, it sounds like the grit and the vibe of like a hardcore hip hop album, but then the melodic content and the sophistication of like some bop language in there too, and your own unique melodic approach. It's just like, you can almost like turn your ears to the side just to hear the different layers of what's happening in the music. I mean,
well, I was trying to alter my phrasing to almost phrase like like somebody was rhyming, like a rapper.
Right.
So the takeaway from that project was that it reinforced my feel. It reinforced, how I embrace the beat, because people that rap, they're way behind the beat. Actually, just instinctly. And so that it really, my phrasing changed behind that. And also we tuned some of the samples so that there wouldn't be this sonic clash of samples, as you hear with a lot of people who don't know keys. I had to play in it, and I couldn't play inside that if you had a sample from one record or sample from something else, and they just created this collision. So it had to have a melodic component to it.
There aren't many artists that are doing that sort of in-depth cross-pollination with jazz and hip hop, at least jazz artists that is. I mean, I think about Soweto Kinch, and out in London, somebody like Terrence Martin, maybe. But you know what? I want to shift the conversation just a little bit. You know, I've had such a good time chatting with you here, and maybe sometime in the future we could do a part 2 of this.
Whatever you need.
Okay, amazing. I want to wrap up this conversation for this episode, and just shift into some rapid fire questions. So just give me like short phrases, 1 or 2 answers, and then we'll end with the 3, 2, 1 segment. So what do you think about when you think about Bird?
I think about how music sounded before Bird and how music sounded after Bird. He was that socially and globally significant.
Amazing. What do you like most about, or what did you like most about the scene in New York when you were growing up?
I liked the idea that we could do club hopping on a nightly basis, and we could hit an assortment of clubs, and they would let us in. You know, we were young, we were broke, but they would let us in because a lot of the clubs had 3 sets. So the last set was sparsely populated, and they would let us in. Maybe not on the weekends, but we can get in and get an up close and personal view of a lot of our heroes on a nightly basis. And there were a ton of jam sessions too, so you can go work it out.
Okay. You know? Small chamber with hard reed or big chamber with soft reed?
For me, big chamber with soft reed.
Cool.
Yeah.
Cool. I would like you to share 3 albums that have been influential for you, 2 saxophone players that have been influential for you, and then leave the audience with 1 piece of advice.
Okay, 3 albums. One has been Duke Ellington, Indigos. You know, to just listen to that all the way through, and you'll know what I'm talking about. Charles Mingus Incredible. Okay. 3, let's see. I'll just put it out there. Andrew Hill, Smokestack.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
What about 2 saxophone players that have been influential?
Ooh, that could take a while, but I'll say Earl Bostic.
Okay. Wow.
Earl Bostic. Joe Henderson.
Okay. Wow. Wasn't expecting those 2 names, but very, very cool. And let's leave us with 1 piece of advice.
I would like for our listeners to adapt the identity of that of a sponge, a musical, social, intellectual, and informational sponge, meaning that you're absorbing as much as you possibly can from every possible resource, without bias and without judgment. And to take that information, that gained information, and to filter it and to incorporate that which is useful to your pursuit, and not to discard the other, information, put that aside, because you may have to refer to it later after you've lived a little bit and after you've learned a lot. You will recognize that other information, you just didn't understand it at that time.
Yeah.
You weren't ready for it yet.
That's great. Well, I definitely think I would love to have you back for part 2. There's so many questions I still have and things that we could explore even more, but it's been a pleasure having you, having this conversation with you. How can people stay in contact with you or find you online, maybe?
Yeah, well, I'm one of the rare people in my generation who readily embraces social media, just in terms of immediate access. So at Greg Osby on Twitter, Instagram. I just joined TikTok.
Nice.
I'm on Facebook.
Yeah.
I'm on everything. I'm everywhere.
Okay. And then your website is gregosby.com?
gregosby.com. And also my label is innercirclemusic.com.
Yeah, I love to talk about that next time we chat, just as starting an indie label and the dynamics of the shift in the music industry and all of that, for upcoming artists. So we leave all of that for part two. Enjoy
Sure.
the rest of it, Big Greg. Thanks so much. If you're watching, if you're listening on Spotify, thanks so much for listening. And I'll catch you on the next one. Take care.